Hey folks, welcome once again to The Flip Side. My name is Mark, and tonight we're going to be talking about the case of Kelli Cribbs Abad. And this young lady was the wife of a serving US military member who, while stationed on the island of Okinawa in Japan in 2011, mysteriously disappeared. Her case is currently listed as open and ongoing, but who for the last 10 years has remained, her whereabouts have remained a complete mystery. But before we get started, please do, I'll ask you to subscribe, hit the notifications bell so that you'll be updated as and when we upload new content. And at the moment we're uploading about once a week. This is a very new channel, but if you enjoy stories of true crimes, cold cases, paranormal events and just unexplained weirdness, this is the kind of content that you'll expect to come from this channel. But without further ado, let's get into the case, the very sad case of Kelli Cribbs Abad, here on The Flip Side. Kelli Cribbs grew up in the small town of Brooklet, just outside of Savannah, Georgia. Her childhood was as normal as to be expected in such a rural town. She would play with friends, and she also had her brother and half-sister to keep her company when around the house. Her parents, who were hard-working rural folk, worked their small farm in order to make ends meet. Kelli would often work on the farm as she liked the animals, but she also liked to go fishing and do most of the things that young girls of her same age would do. As she grew, she started to help more and more with the elderly people of her community and spent a lot of time with her grandmother. It was during her time spent with her grandmother that she would come into greater contact with more elderly folk, to which she tended to gravitate towards. Kelli's half-sister, Jennifer Lisa Schumann, noted that even though she had a 14-year age difference, the two were close when they were growing up. They regularly spoke on the phone and would often hang out during family gatherings. She had a smile for everyone, even if she didn't really enjoy smiling, Jennifer would often say. Now, Kelli's mother, Janice, says her daughter had a very outgoing personality. She was always very helpful and had a heart for working with children and the elderly, Janice said. So it came as no surprise to her or the family that as Kelli grew, she wanted to become, and actually did become, a nursing and medical assistant. Now, while living at home, Kelli met Vince Abad, an airman stationed at a US Air Force base close to their hometown in Georgia. The couple's relationship blossomed, and in 2006 they were married. Now, after the wedding and as married life took hold, the couple took a journey that involved moving around several Air Force bases around the country. And as the years progressed, so did their family. They welcomed two children, a son named Vince and a daughter named Kyrie. Now, in both cases, Kelli experienced complications during pregnancies, but this was mainly down to her being just so petite. And these complications had no ill impact on the health of the children. Both were born healthy and well. Now, it wasn't until 2008 that Vince received orders for relocation to the Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, Japan. And as with everything in her life, Kelli accepted the posting and set about preparing for the move. Eventually, the Abad family picked up sticks, packed their bags, and headed to the subtropical island that is Okinawa. Settling into life on the island, Kelli quickly made friends. And when stationed in Okinawa, military members and their families have options to either live within the local community outside of the base perimeter or take advantage of housing on base. Kelli and Vince lived on base. Now, as with any relationship, there were a few bumps along the way. But as the years passed in Okinawa, so it seemed the issues within the relationship also grew. Maybe a change of scenery would allow the couple an option to try and reset, to start afresh. Kelli's family recalled that they would often talk with Kelli on Skype, and Kelli's mother Janice said that it was during one of these routine Skype calls on October the 25th, 2011, that Kelli mentioned that she, Vince and the kids were being relocated once again. According to Janice, Kelli informed her that she'd be looking forward to the move, which was going to be either to Germany or Alaska. Given the hardships within the relationship, it was understood that Kelli simply wanted to get out of Okinawa. She was done with being in Japan and wished to be in a potentially more familiar surrounding of a Western setting. Now, additionally, given the state of the relationship, Kelli and Vince, who were both deeply religious people, had agreed to confide in their pastor to discuss their personal matters with him, trying to find a way through their faith to get back on track. Little did the family know that that Skype chat that they'd had with Kelli on October the 25th, 2011, would be the last time that they would ever talk to her. On Wednesday, October the 26th, 2011, Janice was told that 27-year-old Kelli had picked up and collected the kids from school and played with them in the yard until around 7 p.m, at which time they set out for a church service located off of base. Kelli's husband Vince also attended the church service that night, but arrived separately and later due to the demands of his work schedule. Having had a blazing argument that day on the phone, they wanted to go through potential solutions with their pastor. Now, at or around 8:45 p.m, Kelli and the kids arrived home from the church service, and Kelli tucked the children into bed. Vince would later tell Kelli's sister Jennifer that he had stayed longer at the church than Kelli and the kids, so that he could speak at greater length with the pastor. Vince then said that he subsequently arrived at home at around about 10 o'clock in the evening, and he told Jennifer that when he got there, the kids were tucked up in bed and asleep, but that Kelli was nowhere to be found. He said that her car was also missing from the family home. Now, on hearing the news from Vince that her daughter was thought to be missing, Kelli's mother, Janice, recalls, "At first I wanted to think she spent the night with one of her friends, but she added that her daughter wouldn't even let the kids play in the yard alone, so she definitely wouldn't tuck them into bed and just leave them," a sentiment shared by Kelli's sister, Jennifer, but also by pretty much everyone who knew her. Vince reported Kelli missing to the Kadena officials and local Japanese authorities the following morning, as she still hadn't returned. Now, having had arguments in the past, Kelli had, on previous occasions, left the family home and slept at friends' houses just to cool off. Vince thought again that this is what Kelli had opted to do in this particular instance. Now, in a 2011 email to Kelli's family, Kadena Air Force Base officials told them that Kelli was seen entering the base at 20:37 p.m. on October the 26th, the night she was supposed to have disappeared. The email continued saying that Kelli's vehicle was then seen leaving the base again about 30 minutes later at 11 minutes past 9. Kelli's phone was at that time turned off, and it was never turned back on. Now, according to that same email, Kelli's car was then found at 04:20 hours on the morning of Saturday, October the 29th, 2011, near the cliffs at a popular location called Cape Zampa. Inside were her keys, telephone, ID and wedding rings, and Jennifer also recounts that there was a note left in the car that basically said, "I love my kids, I love my family and my parents, goodbye." Jennifer recalls, "I saw a copy of that note and I was never convinced that it was written that night," she said, adding that she's sure that her sister did not commit suicide, as the note implies. "It was weird, is all I can tell you. Far from ever sounding depressed to her family, she simply would not leave her children alone to such an uncertain future. There was also no pen or writing implement found in Kelli's abandoned car." Kelli's mother Janice is also sure that if there was such an issue of such gravity affecting Kelli's marriage or relationship with Vince, that her daughter would have confided in her without any shadow of a doubt. Now, officials with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or OSI, which was originally signed to Kelli's case, seem to be dragging their heels. They were, and remain, reluctant to share any case information with Kelli's family. A representative from the Okinawa Police Department, the investigating local agency working on Kelli's case in conjunction with the US Air Force, do however confirm that Kelli's case is being treated as an ongoing missing persons investigation. One thing to look at in this case is the matter of jurisdiction. All bases in Okinawa are, of course, fenced off and are run as if they were located within the US. This means that they have all of the amenities such as emergency services available to them. This includes police, ambulance, fire service and investigative services. However, once someone steps off of base, they are then under the jurisdiction of the Japanese authorities. Now, within these authorities, one then has to contend with the regional wards or counties into which Okinawa is divided. As everywhere, it seems administration, once again, sets to tie all channels of communication into knots. Knots that can easily be unravelled or not, depending on the amount of local or international politics involved. Now, it's a given in Okinawa and in Japan in general that there is all too often quite forceful pushback from the local community with regards to the American presence on the island. Numerous infamous crimes over the years have done nothing to endear the American community on Okinawa with the locals, even though so much good comes back from within the American community towards their local hosts. There are always a few bad apples in the crate, so to speak. Now, there are some groups on Okinawa set up by Americans that focus on helping disadvantaged communities, the mentally challenged and destitute elements of Okinawan society. In addition, there are charities set up again for the welfare of stray wildlife and solutions for the cleaning of beaches, especially of plastic pollution. Now, unfortunately, that all being said, there is a prevailing sense that the different investigating bodies are simply passing the buck backwards and forwards between each other with regards to certain elements of this case. In November of 2011, Kelli's mother Janice flew to Okinawa desperate to help with the search for her daughter. She spent her time putting up flyers and asking neighbours and police as much as she could about Kelli's disappearance. "I think she was abducted. I don't believe she jumped off of those cliffs," Janice said. Now, Kelli and Vince's children now also live with Vince and his current wife, a woman he had met while he was still married to Kelli. Vince remarried in 2014 after he was granted a divorce from Kelli, who is still listed as a missing person. Now, Matt Burke, a staff reporter for the American military newspaper Stars and Stripes, worked at the paper's Okinawa bureau and has been following Kelli's case. Matt recalls that he's been denied case information from the Office of Special Investigations, or OSI, numerous times. "I asked questions that they continually refused to answer," he said, saying that they could not do anything until Kelli was declared deceased, suggesting that they were protecting her privacy. Another entity intrigued by this case is a guy by the name of Jeff Smith. Now, Jeff is an ex-Marine who was stationed in Okinawa from 2012 until 2016, before retiring and subsequently relocating his family to Okinawa, where he resides to this day. Jeff also, when possible, recruits people to search different parts of the island with him. "Honestly, the case has just intrigued me, and I often share the story with friends or anyone who will listen," he says. "If people seem interested, we get together and brainstorm, as well as sometimes even go out looking for additional clues or even to try and find any trace of Kelli." Now, with such an area to cover, with it being so large, having enough volunteers willing to head out on searches is, one would imagine, always going to be a challenge, especially as this case sadly gets older and colder. So what else do we know about this case? Kelli is said to have disappeared when her car was filmed leaving the base on the evening of October 26, 2011, but her car wasn't found until almost 3 days later in the early hours of Saturday the 29th at the tourist spot known as Cape Zampa. What we do know is that it was almost low tide at the time the car was found, so that would suggest if she jumped at that time, she would have ended up tangled in the rocks that are dotted along the base of these 100-foot cliffs of the area. Given the fact that waves in this region tend to be pretty powerful, it's also a possibility that anyone in the water in the region could theoretically get forced into any one of the numerous caves and gullies that are found along that particular area of coastline. Now, one of the attractions for scuba divers able to visit the areas in the very few days of the year when water conditions allow are the numerous caves and archways at the base of these pretty big cliffs. Now, if the public are being led to believe that Kelli didn't jump on that Wednesday night when she disappeared, where had she been? Where was her car? Where had they been for the 2.5 days, almost 3 days, during which the Japanese police and base OSI had been made aware of her disappearance? One would also imagine that someone would normally cool down after an argument, and after a day or so would return to the family household to start the process of pacification. Are we expected to believe that almost 3 days later, Kelli would still be of the mind to jump on that early Saturday morning? It must also be noted that at both of those specific timings, the time when she was supposed to have disappeared and the time when her car was found, at both of those times, the tidal flow was at either low or approaching low tide. This would therefore suggest that if Kelli had jumped at the night of the 26th or in the early hours of the 29th, she would not have made the water, but she would have landed on the heavily rocky area that's at the base of those cliffs. Now, another question that many people have is why OSI haven't to date allowed any of Kelli's immediate blood relatives access to the footage of her car reportedly leaving the base via the main gate at 11 minutes past 9 on the night of October the 26th. Did they even keep a copy? And even if they did, was it clear enough to see who was driving the car? Kelli's car was said to have been found at Cape Zampa at around 04:20 on the early morning of Saturday the 29th of October, almost 3 days after her disappearance, but this in itself raises even more questions. Kelli's car was shown to have exited the gate on the Wednesday evening. Now, 2 nights later, on the Friday evening, an American woman who we'll call Betty, along with her husband, were in the Cape Zampa region to photograph the night sky. Being an avid photographer, Becky wanted to photograph a particular statue found at that location with stars in the background. She'd just completed a night photography workshop with one of the photographers based on the island and wanted to try out what she'd learned. By her account, her and her husband left Cape Zampa at around 2300 hours or 11 p.m. on the Friday night. Kelli's car was found just 5.5 hours later. However, Becky recalls that when she left Cape Zampa, no other cars were in the car park. So how, if Kelli disappeared a few nights earlier, how did her car arrive at Cape Zampa between Friday the 28th at 11 o'clock when Becky left and Saturday the 29th at 04:20, just 5.5 hours later? Who drove it there? A Japanese man, we'll call the jogger, is also said to have reported that he had been out running in the day preceding the discovery of the vehicle, but stated to Japanese police that he had also not seen any vehicle at the time he passed through. He'd heard about the discovery of the car on local news and wished to inform Japanese law enforcement of his observation. Now, further to the contents found in the car, an adult fingerprint was also found, a fingerprint that belonged to neither Kelli nor Vince. So whose was it? That again is something that's never been solved. Reports submitted show that the car was also found unlocked. Inside the car, the investigators found Kelli's rings, her smartphone, wallet, ID, and a few other bits and pieces, as well as what was suggested as being a brief suicide note. It seemed that people are being led to believe that Kelli allegedly arrived at Cape Zampa on the Wednesday evening, where she had then presumed to have jumped from the cliffs to her death. Cape Zampa, unfortunately, is a high crime area with numerous instances of people's cars being broken into. In fact, there are signs all around the area warning people not to leave valuables in their cars due to such crimes taking place. It would therefore be almost impossible for a car to be left abandoned and unlocked in that location for a period of almost 3 days and to have nothing stolen from it. Thieves would have noted that car immediately on the first night of it being there. All American personnel and their dependents in Okinawa are easily identified when driving on the roads, as their license plates are pretty unique. The majority of cars registered to US military personnel and their families carry a prefix letter Y, as you can see in this image here. Now, thieves generally tend to target these vehicles given the understanding that Americans tend to have more luxurious goods in their cars than Okinawa locals. Now, another incident further reinforces the idea that maybe the placement of the car at Cape Zampa was a ruse to shake people from the trail. Numerous cases of suicide have been documented over the years at Cape Zampa. It's this fact that shores up the assumption that what may have happened in Kelli's case that gives it greater credibility. Now Jeff, the ex-Marine, was once contacted by a serving airman on Okinawa who knew that Jeff was interested in the case. Now he had mentioned to Jeff that he had found skeletal remains not in Cape Zampa, but in the much less populated but much denser vegetation area in the north of Okinawa at a place known as Cape Hedo. This area is noted, as is Cape Zampa, for an incredibly rocky shoreline and huge tidal currents that sweep along its coast. The airman had been out exploring and happened on a rocky area in the north, and clambering up the rocks he came to a recessed area almost like a cave, and it was in this cave that he found skeletal remains. He had mentioned this to Jeff but had failed to take the GPS coordinates of the cave, and thus on a second trip he was unable to relocate the remains. Now sadly, without any evidence to offer law enforcement, neither OSI nor the local Japanese authorities were willing to head out to the very north of the island in order to investigate. Okinawa is an incredibly rocky island. Its coastline is a mass of intricate caves and reefs that make it quite the place to explore, and many people do. Now historically, it wasn't out of the ordinary for some locals to place recently deceased members of their family into small caves around the coastline. Given the ancient beliefs of the indigenous people of the islands, some of their gods lived in or close to the ocean, and by placing recently deceased people as close as they could to the ocean meant that their departing souls were also close to the particular deities that they worshipped. Now while this particular practice is no longer continued in modern times, there have been cases where human remains have been found in caves and subsequently dated back many hundreds, if not thousands of years. Another and more somber reason for the propensity to find skeletal remains in caves in Okinawa is due to the many people who perished in caves during the battle for Okinawa in the Second World War. Caves tended to offer greater protection from the aerial bombardments, and so they were often used by many to evade the encroaching US forces. Also, the American GIs, for the most part, wouldn't be entering many of the caves, and as far away as locals could get from these foreign devils, in their minds, the better. Japanese military and local authorities during the war had spun misinformation about the Americans and Allied troops, suggesting they were cannibalistic by nature and would often devour anyone they caught. That said, the war in Okinawa was also mainly focused around the southern segment of the island, whereas the remains found by the airmen were found in the dense jungles of northern Okinawa. Now hypothetically, if someone with ill intent had done their homework about Okinawa and they learned of the potential to find historical or war remains in caves around the island, I'm sure that could be used as an alibi to help deflect any suspicious finds in later years. Sadly, such an excuse could also be used by law enforcement not wanting to get embroiled in a 10-year-old cold case. Now, since the events of this case, local Okinawa police tend not to comment any further to protect the integrity of the investigation, but they do say that Kelli's case remains open and active. And while Jeff continues searching in Okinawa, Kelli's family members continue to wonder what happened to Kelli. "I just want to find her and bring her home," Janice, her mother, says. "I want to be able to move on, to have closure." Jennifer, Kelli's sister, on the other hand, feels not enough is being done to find her sister. "I feel like we've failed Kelli in some ways," she says. "I just want to find my sister, or her body, so badly. It's a daily, agonizing loss." Kelli Cribbs Abad is described as being 5'11", weighing 116 pounds at the time of her disappearance. She has blonde hair, green eyes, and was known to be wearing a very specific looking pendant with a red heart on it. Now, if you or anyone you know may have information relating to Kelli's disappearance, please do send an email to findkellynow@yahoo.com, or if you are in Okinawa, please do contact Gidena Air Force, OSI, or local police authorities. And there we have it, guys, the very sad tale of Kelli Cribbs Abad, a cold case, still active, still open. Let's hope that authorities can find a solution to what happened and give the family some closure. Now, if you haven't, please do subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and if you like that video, please hit the like button. There will be more content coming from me over the next week or so. I'm hoping to do one update a week, whether it's a cold case, a true crime, something mysterious, something alien, who knows. But whatever it is, it's going to be intriguing, and it will be found here on the flip side. Take care, guys and girls, and I will see you very soon.